It is 1836, and the room is full of cigar smoke and pomp. We are at a party thrown by Daniel Stern, a well-known author. And as well-known authors do, they invite other well-known authors to their fancy cigar-smoking parties. And at least one composer. Hello and welcome to Gin and the Tonic, a reckless unpacking of music history's weirdest stories. I'm Colin Healy, and today's gin is Bombay Dry. It's fancy and a bit expensive, and was a gift from someone who makes more money than me. Tastes like that too. Today's tonic is E. And E stands for Frederick. Frederick Chopin was born in, good lord, Jelizavola in 1810. He was either born on February 22nd or on March 1st. We don't know because it was 1810 and children didn't matter, and neither did their birthdays. Shortly after Chopin was born, they moved from to Warsaw, where they lived in a palace because his father was a teacher, and that's how they treated teachers back then. Chopin, or as they said, the child, as he grew, was of slight build and prone to illness. So he was short and sickly. Par for the course. All this stuff you'd expect happened over the rest of his childhood. Normal stuff. He went to conservatory. He was given a diamond ring by the Tsar. He played recitals on weird chimera instruments called crazy shit, like the Aleomelodicon, a hybrid of the piano and organ, and the Aleopantaleon, a hybrid of a piano and a pair of trousers, I presume. Oh! And his sister died. After the death of his sister, Frederick would finish school and promptly leave Warsaw. He would not return to Poland for the rest of his life. In 1830, he left for Paris with his last report from conservatory in hand, quote, Chopin F., third-year student, exceptional talent, musical genius. Chopin began to hobnob around with his contemporaries like Hector Berlioz and Eugene Delacroix and all the other future episodes of this show. But he wouldn't find critical success in Paris until 1831, when a review came in that said of Chopin, "Hats off, gentlemen! A genius!" That review was penned by none other than Gin and the Tonic's resident shit-talker and emo darling boy, Robert Schumann. But one of Chopin's contemporaries would stand out and become a great friend of his, and that was Franz Liszt. In music history circles, dorks! Their friendship has endured the ages. They also hated each other. Liszt and Chopin were neighbors and would often share studies in each other's parlors. That sounds like a euphemism. It's not. They would literally go over to each other's houses to play piano, which is cute, but not a euphemism for anything sexual. Chopin and Liszt did not have sex. This is history, not my fan fiction. Chopin would say of Liszt, quote, I should like to rob him of the way he plays my studies. Liszt would often annoy him at concerts when he would play Chopin's music but then add a bunch of shit. Liszt performed one of Chopin's Nocturnes, a slow and somber type of piece that Liszt filled with virtuosic embellishments, of course to the great affection of the crowd. But Chopin was not pleased. In fact, after that performance, Chopin and Liszt's friendship grew cold. However, many historians think that it was the men's romantic lives that began to make them drift apart. Liszt was jealous of the affection for Chopin showed by an author named Marie Dagoul, better known by her pen name, Daniel Stern. It is 1836, and the room is full of cigar smoke and pomp. We are at a party thrown by Daniel Stern, a well-known author. And as well-known authors do, they invite other well-known authors to their fancy cigar-smoking parties. One of those well-known authors was a brooding, barely 5-foot-tall, big-eyed cigar smoker with the pen name George Sand. And George had eyes for Chopin. George Sand was born Amantine Lucile Aurore Dupin, or Aurore to her family. Yes, George Sand was a woman. And before we go on, let's get this straight. There are 2 female authors that go by male pen names. Aurore Dupin is George Sand, and she and Chopin met at a party thrown by Marie Dagoul, who goes by Daniel Stern. And this is all in your program. You're at the opera. Go down, study a little bit if you want to get with the plot. It was very difficult at this time, if not impossible, for women to be published authors. So many women, like Marie Dagoul as Daniel Stern, would use this male pen name to get around the cultural roadblock. However, in their personal lives, it was an open secret who these women really were. In fact, while for much of her career as George Sand, she was heralded among the French literary giants like Victor Hugo as Aurore Dupin, she was widely known for pushing back against these cultural norms. In addition to the public cigar smoking and frequenting men's-only clubs, she... Well, I don't know how to say this. She wore pants. Now, this was a big deal at the time. Women had to apply for a permit to wear men's clothing. I know. Be it for health or recreation or whatever. Dupin, though, did not have a permit. And she did not plan on applying for one. She wore them explicitly for the purpose of subverting gender stereotypes. And also because, as she said, they were less expensive and far sturdier than the typical dress. Also, you know, pockets! Victor Hugo admired her, saying, quote, "George Sand cannot determine whether she is male or female. I entertain a high regard for all of my colleagues, but it is not my place to decide whether she is my sister or my brother." Damn, Victor. If only some people in the 2020s were as progressive as you were in the 1820s. In 1822, Dupin married the bastard orphan son of a baron named Casimir Dudevant. They had 2 children that may or may not have been Casimir's. A boy named Maurice, who is not important to this story, but is actually super fascinating. He grew up and took his mother's pen name and was part of a movement that paved the way to vaudeville and ultimately musical theater. And a girl named Solange, who would not take her mother's name and is less interesting because she's not Solange Knowles. She's more important to this story. Aurore left Casimir in 1831 in order to partake in what she called a, quote, romantic rebellion. Aurore had a hoe phase. It's okay. We all do. We've all been there. No shame.
I haven't.
Shut up! She had public affairs with a bunch of socialist dudes and one lady, whose Wikipedia pages don't say much about the men and lady themselves, but more about how they used to hook up with George Sand. It was during this time that she became friends with Marie Dagoul. They were both progressive women around the same age, and both successful authors that used male pen names. And it was through this friendship that in 1836, Aurore found herself at a certain party with other cigar-smoking, well-known authors. Chopin was initially repulsed by Sand, saying of her, quote, "What an unattractive person. Is she really a woman?" The following year, they were madly in love. Unfortunately, a side effect of a hoe face, as we all know, is one of those boys was bound to be crazy. Félicien Malafille, whose name I've been told translates literally as happily a bad girl, began sending Dupin threats. Around this time, Chopin's health was fading, so Aurore decided it would be a good idea to go away for the winter to Majorca, an island in the Mediterranean, and nurse not only Chopin back to health, but also escape the threats of Mr. Bad Girl. It was an unseasonably cold winter in Majorca. It was wet and miserable. And also Maurice and Solange were there. How romantic. It's 1838, and because of that, this should come as no surprise to you, but Chopin by now had developed incipient tuberculosis. Aurore knew about this, and in fact, she had known since before they got together, but the cold and wet winter spent in Majorca wasn't particularly good for him. He complained of his doctors in Majorca, saying, quote, "3 doctors have visited me. The first said I was dead. The second said I was dying. And the third said that I was about to die." He requested that a piano be sent to him, but it didn't come for some time because, it's a piano in there on an island in the middle of the Mediterranean. It's 1838. But that didn't stop Chopin. Aurore had furnished a small, subpar by Chopin standards, piano that, like him, did not fare well in the unseasonable winter. Yet it was during this winter, and on this piano, that Chopin would have one of the most productive compositional periods of his life, where he would compose 5 pieces: a ballade, a scherzo, 2 polonaises, and of course, his preludes in E minor. Today's tonic. Chopin, Sand, Maurice, and Solange returned from Majorca and moved around a bit before settling back in Paris in the Square d'Orléans in 1842, where they lived in adjacent buildings. It was at this point that Chopin started showing signs of his health deteriorating. The pianist Charles Halle wrote of him, quote, "Chopin was hardly able to move, bent like a half-open penknife, and evidently in great pain." Historians today believe this might have been as a result of epilepsy. By 1846, Sand had become more of a nurse than a lover, openly referring to Chopin as, quote, her 3rd child, unquote, a sufferer, end quote, her beloved little corpse. He was apathetic toward her socialist politics, and she had great disdain for Chopin's high society friends. This disdain extended to the now 19-year-old Solange's fortune-hunting husband. Aurore and Solange had famously loud and over-the-top fights in which Chopin would side with Solange which went over as well as you think it would. It was against the backdrop of all this drama that Chopin would end their relationship in 1847. Oh yeah. And also Chopin would find it within himself, despite the epilepsy and tuberculosis, to hook up with Solange for a while after he broke it off with Sand, her mother. Gross. So what did Sand do? Well, what do you think she did? She went and hooked up with Franz Liszt. In 1848, Chopin's health would take a turn for the worse. In the middle of a performance at a house party, he suddenly and without explanation got up and left the room. He would later write that he saw, quote, cursed creatures appearing from inside the piano. After gathering himself, he would re-enter with as much explanation as when he left. And when he sat down to play again, he resumed the concert with his funeral march. In 1849, his surviving sister Ludwika and her family came to live with him. She would find him late at night, quote, pale in front of the piano with wild eyes and his hair on end, rambling about a cohort of phantoms that would haunt him from inside the instrument. Though it was mostly his family that remained by his side at the end, some would come to entertain him at the piano, as Chopin found himself too weak to play, or perhaps too terrified of the demons. On October 17th, 1849, a doctor asked him if he was still suffering. Quote, "No longer," Chopin replied. Over 3,000 people attended his funeral. And true to her own words, quote, "We cannot tear a single page from our life, but we can throw the whole book into the fire." George Sand was not among them. The cause of Chopin's death has been the subject of great debate to the present day. At the time, it was said that he died of tuberculosis, but even then, as if to portend the coming confusion over his demise, Chopin's heart was preserved in a jar. Though visual examinations have been performed over the years, the jar has never been opened. Scholars today contend that he probably succumbed to cystic fibrosis or liver disease, the latter of which, despite the fact that he was not known to abuse alcohol or drugs. But then there were the hallucinations, which hint that he also might have been suffering from schizophrenia. Chopin's improvisational style and revolutionary harmonic structure was a capstone of the Romantic era. His work was known for being played with rubato, which means outside of strict or conventional time, often for dramatic effect. That's Chopin, though. A rule follower? No. A flair for the dramatic? Yes. But also timeless. Gin and the Tonic is a production of Fly North Theatricals in residence at the Kransberg Arts Foundation and is filmed at our Studio B, located in the Grand Center Arts District in St. Louis, Missouri. Gin and the Tonic is written by me, edited by Sabrina Ortiz, directed and filmed by John Gramlich. Our staff interns are Sabrina Ortiz and Caroline Guffey. Our resident bartender is Bradley Rohlf, and he also does the sound. All music is written by me except the Preludes in E minor, which is Chopin. Thanks for watching, and make sure to destroy the demons coming out of that subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications.